I want to take a look at a report that came out yesterday from Dan Graziano of ESPN. He shared this in an article yesterday, and he said this: the Packers, who have been more aggressive free agent bidders in the Brian Gutekunst era than their reputation suggests, could be spenders this month. They're looking to add a veteran wide receiver to their very young room. They'll be looking for upgrades on defense too, especially considering they're listening to trade offers for cornerback Jair Alexander, and they'll have to find a way to replace center Josh Myers if he leaves in free agency. So Graziano says the Packers are looking to add a veteran wide receiver to their room. This is not surprising, even though we hadn't exactly heard this specifically out there. Gutekunst had said in one of his postseason press conferences that, if there was a guy out there they liked, they'd be willing to go after him, which I think is the case for, any GM in the NFL. But, when we look at the past with the Packers when it comes to free agency spending, the receiver position has not been one where the Packers have really spent up in years past. You think of some of the guys the Packers have signed as free agent receivers in years past, in the past, 5 or so years. You got Randall Cobb coming back to Green Bay when Rodgers wanted him. He was at the latter end of his career. You got Devin Funchess on a really cheap deal, ended up not even playing in that 2020 season, I believe it was. And yeah, that Sammy Watkins signing a few years back. And so we just have not seen Brian Gutekunst go out in free agency and spend up on a big-time wide receiver. And I think there's a lot of different factors for that. I mean, in those previous years, you already had Devontae, and so Gutekunst did not see the need to go out and put a lot more money in the wide receiver position. And I think where the Packers are right now, this could be it is a different scenario than in years past, which could change the way that Gutekunst operates. Because I think with the young receivers the Packers have right now, this past season, I think, was the year that we really hoped to see a lot of them take big strides forward. And I think all in all, they still played, a lot of them played solid football. There was a lot of inconsistency, no doubt. Big drop issue for Reed and Wicks, no doubt. That was a massive problem. But still, this Packers offense was a top 10 unit in the NFL. And I think that, sometimes that can be overlooked. They were still a very solid unit. If Jordan Love played better football in the Eagles game, this could have looked way different. So if tomorrow, if the season were to start and the Packers did absolutely nothing at wide receiver, I wouldn't be that concerned. I really just think that Wicks is going to take a step forward. I think if he can start catching the ball, which obviously is a huge thing if you're a receiver, he's going to be great. He's an elite route runner. He just needs to catch the ball, which obviously very important, no doubt. But honestly, if you told me starting in September, no additions at wide receiver, I think the Packers would be fine. I think they would still be a top 10 offense. So with that in mind, when it says here the Packers are going to target a veteran receiver, would I be absolutely shocked if Gutekunst finally came in and said, you know what, we're going big time, we're spinning up, we're going to, potentially sign a guy? There's not a lot of great options on the free agent market that are home runs, I would say. You got Chris Godwin. He's been injured recently. He is a little bit older. T. Higgins just got tagged, which I touched on that in a video in the past hour or so. But it could happen. The Packers could spend up at wide receiver. I feel like the most likely scenario, based on some Gutekunst comments and based on the Packers' history, I bet the way it goes is the Packers end up signing a guy for $7 million at receiver, someone like Marquez Valdes-Scantling, bringing him back, maybe Marquise Brown, who signed with the Chiefs a year prior, 1 year, $7 million. I haven't seen any updates on him with the Chiefs. Maybe I've missed something about them wanting to bring him back, but if he does hit free agency, that's an option. Part of me just feels like in the end of all this, with all this talk with the rumors, potential, those conflicting reports about DK Metcalf, it sort of feels, I think a lot of Packers fans feel this way, as I've experienced over the years, where, there starts to be this talk of the Packers are talking with this team about this guy. The Packers are pursuing this guy. And then lots of times it ends up going nowhere. And, you'd like to say, well, at some point, maybe Brian Gutekunst, sort of goes away from that. But at the same time, it wouldn't be shocking if we started September and the Packers didn't really do much at receiver. They draft a guy in the second or third round. They sign a guy for, $5 to $10 million in free agency. I feel like that's the most likely scenario based on the Packers' past. And let me just share this quote as well from Gutekunst, one of his postseason press conferences. He said, I think we have some of those guys talking about, potential top receiver targets, and I think we don't have just one. But I think historically, if you look at a lot of the teams, very rarely do teams that have one receiver that's super heavy with targets, that doesn't usually play out well for playoffs and success there. So that quote alone doesn't sound like a guy who wants to go out and spend $20 to $30 million on a receiver. Not to say he won't, but there are a lot of signs pointing to the Packers not doing something like that. Now, could they? Yes. I think that Gutekunst is willing to sign players in free agency. We saw it last year. Josh Jacobs, one of the top running backs available in free agency. Packers signed him. Xavier McKinney, one of the top, I'd say he was probably the top safety last year at safety. Free agent safeties available. Packers signed him. And so when there's a big need, Gutekunst is not afraid to go and spend up on a position. And I'm just not convinced. I'm not fully convinced that Gutekunst thinks that the Packers wide receiver room desperately needs an expensive veteran receiver. Could it happen? Yes. Would I like it if it happened? Yes. But at the same time, as I said, I wouldn't be terribly upset or concerned about the Packers offense if they actually did absolutely nothing, which I expect them to do something, but just for my overall perspective on this receiver room, I think the Packers are pretty fine. I do think that if Christian Watson was healthy, I would be even more inclined to think the Packers wouldn't do something in free agency. With the injury, I think that's probably more likely they do at least something. And it could be that this is finally the year that things change and the Packers go big at receiver, spend up. It wouldn't be surprising based on, the injuries, based on the fact that there hasn't been a guy that's risen to the top yet, even though I think some of them have the ability. I do think that when you have so many talented receivers, the ball gets spread around a ton. When you have Tucker Kraft as well, the ball gets spread around a ton. So I do wonder if Dobbs got a lot more targets, he maybe put up some of those more top-tier receiver numbers. That's definitely a possibility in my mind. But it's going to be fun to see what happens here because, honestly, I gave you my thoughts on what I think is most likely. But free agency, you never know what could happen. You never know the kinds of moves, the kinds of trades that could go down. And so I'm sort of excited just to sit back and watch and see what Brian Gutekunst decides to do. Will he shock us and finally make a big receiver move? Possibly. We'll keep an eye on it. We'll see what happens. If you want more Packers content, feel free to subscribe. Make sure that you turn on the post notifications so you don't miss any Packers news in the next couple of weeks with free agency, all that kind of stuff. So thank you guys for watching as always, and I will see you guys next time.